It's probably not.
It's April 24th, 2025. We're here at the Oregon State Marine Board offices in Salem. It's roughly 8:30 in the morning, and we're here for our quarterly Oregon State Marine Board meeting. I don't really have any announcements like I usually have. So if anybody else on the board has a pre-meeting announcement. All right. So our first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 23rd meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments on minutes? Thank you, Jennifer, for doing the minutes as always. Great job. And all those.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. Our next item is public comment. The board encourages members of the public to speak to us. As a reminder, the board will not consider testimony on items up for a decision on today's agenda. Speakers will be given 3 minutes to speak and allowed slightly longer at the chair's discretion. Do not expect the board to interact with you after your presentation, although board members may ask questions to clarify a point that you made. Board members, a reminder, if speakers are addressing items that have closed to public comment, we can hear those comments, but the comments should not be considered in your decision-making. Feel free to ask speakers a clarifying question, but because of public notice rules, any deeper discussion with the commenter, staff, or other board members on a topic needs to be brought back as an agenda item for a future meeting or work session. With that, I have 9 names on my sign-up sheet. There may be some more on the list outside. We're going to start with Cindy Burr.
Yep.
All right, come on up. And if you can state your name for the record when you sit down, that'd be great.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Burr, B-U-H-R. My husband and I have been on the Salem River for 29 years now. And I'm here to express my concern over the drift boats that have motors, whether it be electric or gas. The electric motors may have to work harder, but they still are able to run up the river past our house. We're on a beautiful stretch of the river where fishing is like prime, and even the electric boats can power back up to make that run again. Not as often as the gas motors do. The gas motors will run through before they hit the rapids below us. They'll run back up to the upper rapids, and they will make this trip 4, 5, 6 times on that same stretch. And as my husband says, if you've got 4 men in that boat and they make that run 5 times, that's 20 hooks coming through that same section of river. The fish do not stand a chance. And if one of them happens to catch a fish, they spread it to all the other boats. And then it's even worse. They make that run even more. And the gas motor boats, when they power up that river, they are full throttle. They create such a way that it actually disrupts the beaver hut on the rock face on our side of the river. And I've had to watch those beaver rebuild their hut time and time again from the damage those wakes create. And I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to the fish. They are definitely being overfished through that section of river. And I think they should not be allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you for coming. Mike Cosidar.
Let's stand over here, please. Let's stand over here.
Or
I'd like to address everybody.
okay.
My name is Mike Coulthard, and I live on the Slip River on a piece of property that has river frontage. I'm a 3rd generation Coulthard. We've been good stewards to that river, even though we raise cattle and a garden. Anyway, I'm 1.5 miles up from Morgan Park. If you know where that's at, that's the lower end of this restriction proposal. What I see is the greatest amount of damage than all the runs on this proposal. And I'll tell you why. And it's one reason why is because of the Marine Board let these motors fly up and down the river with no restriction on horsepower. There's a jet limit. They did that in 1987, got rid of the jet, had no regard for the size of the motor. And now you're seeing bigger and bigger boats, and it's a crock of manure. Anyway, I read on the computer that maybe a compromise is 10 horse or under. You are not going to solve anything by doing that. These boats are getting better and better equipped to go up and down the river. It doesn't matter how much water you got. They'll go right through all these spawn beds. Anyway, I'm pretty emotional about this because I've fought this for a long time. I went to a meeting in Lincoln City, and the first guy that stood up was from the Marine Board, and he said there has to be conflict. Well, there is conflict, a hell of a lot of conflict, and you can see it by all the submissions that were put in to the Marine Board from the people that want to get rid of these boats, these motors. Now, what I want to say is we're not going to take away your right to fish. What we want to do is restrict how you fish. Go back to your oars like you used to. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out today. Damon McGill.
My name is Damon McGill. That was a hard one to follow. That's very emotional, and that is, he has every right. I've owned a fishing shack for a stretch of the river, and throughout the time that I was on that fishing shack, the boat motors would blow through there many, many times. And they say they need to be self-regulated, but obviously they're not self-regulated if they're blowing upstream. And not all of them, but I would say 90, 95+% of people, the motors blow up through there. Now, when you get a drift boat that's coming down and he comes down around the corner and he's back rowing and say, hey, which side of the river should I go on? You know, he's cordial, being cordial. Because he's a fisherman, I'm a fisherman. You know, we need to all work together on the river. And that's, so I would say most of them do the same thing. Probably 90% of them. There's always those bad few on both sides, but I've seen it many a times. And the stirring it up of the wake and stuff that they leave, you can see the dirt as they're going up through there. There's, you know, kicking up the soil and the silt and everything. And then, you know, I might as well not even fish for a while because it's all muddy and nasty and stuff. It's not real bad, but it's enough that the fish are you know, they didn't like it going through there. One guy told me when I was getting some of the petition going, is he says, I was in the Rogue River swimming. Obviously he wasn't in sleds. And he said, those motors, I could feel them. And he said, and he pointed to this tree over there by his place. And he says, I could feel vibration of those. He says, but then when the big jet boats, you know, with all those 20 people or whatever on it, he says, you could feel it even farther, the vibration in the water, just sitting in there, you know, cooling off. But just take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Hammerman.
Yeah. So I'm just here. It's not my, first time in front of the State Marine Board on this topic. You guys probably have looked into the history. I think that the people have said 87, but I think it was actually earlier than that. First restrictions came up. All the people in here, people like Mike's very passionate. He lives on the river. I fish around him. I've fished around him for 30 years. They're out there on a regular basis. Since the last Marine Board hearing, I've taken it upon myself to try to really build our community, try to start a nonprofit for select anglers who we do a lot of work in the area, trying to increase the number of fish being planted. Met with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife yesterday, trying to triple our winter steelhead smolt plants. I met with Fish and Wildlife yesterday about trying to increase our summer steelhead plants from 50 to 80,000. They've been very resistant over the last, 15 years to add more fish, but I think we're finally getting there as the political environment towards hatchery fish has changed, as they've done more research and found out they're not bad. And so we've spent a lot of time really trying to build a community, and I won't say anything negative about, anyone here, because we all are passionate about the sleds. We finally this year got, two of the people in the room from the tribe came to our Sleds Anglers event and spoke about, some of the stuff that they have going on and kind of trying to do that. And so I feel like if we are given the opportunity that we as a community can resolve this, try to come up with compromise, hear what's important to people. One of the last times we actually did this, we discussed horsepower limit compromises within the community and came up with a couple ideas. And we just had one or two people that were adamant that they weren't going to work together. So we put it in front of the State Marine Board, and the State Marine Board ruled to keep it open as an opportunity for all. And so, a lot of people here have said, we're not here about limiting who has access and who doesn't. But, for me personally, I've had my wrist rebuilt twice. I've got pretty good scars in it. I can't flex it forward or backwards other than that. So be out there having to row your boat for 8 hours a day is not something I'm going to have access to the river. So I have access to the river because I can run a motor, and I've guided the river for probably over 30 years. I think I got my first guide's license in '88. I looked that up at the State Marine Board. I'm second generation fishing guide. My dad is also fishing guide in the Sleds. It's our passion. And so the last time we had a State Marine Board hearing, we all sat here and fought each other. And I feel like it really hurt our community to go after each other. And I feel like the tribe's our future on the Sleds. And I feel like working hand in hand with them is where we're going to benefit. And to me, I really hope that we have an opportunity to sit down with the tribe, hear what their concerns are, hear the community members, because it's not just the tribe. You can hear a couple people that got up so far are community members. Let's see what we can work out. Let's see if we can continue to make the Sleds a better place. And I think that the biggest issue over the winter steelhead fishing is we haven't had many fish the last few years because the hatcheries have killed our smolts, I think, 4 times in a 10-year period. So we aren't getting many fish in the river. So the people that are there are all competitive for them because there's not. So that's just my concerns.
Great. Thank you for coming out today.
Thank you.
Buddy Lane.
Good morning. It's good to be here. My name's Buddy Lane. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. I'm also a lifelong resident of the community of Siletz, with the exception of the time spent at university at Oregon State. But I know all folks here from our community. Mike, who spoke, was babysat by his daughter, went to school with his nieces. But I'm also an elected member of our tribal government. And this is a very important issue to us. To me personally, I've grown up on the Siletz River fishing it. And I've seen the change just in my lifetime from 1982 to present day, and the impact on fish runs and the pressures and that our fish are facing, and also the ecosystem as a whole. There's a lot of emphasis on salmon and steelhead, but there's also a whole bunch of other things, eels. I look at the water skippers, the periwinkles, the crawdads, freshwater mussels. There's a whole bunch of things in the system that are being impacted negatively by boat motors and folks pursuing them and using this mechanical advantage to make multiple passes upstream, downstream. And there's a whole bunch of factors that are impacting them. I'm not here to ignore things that are going on in our oceans, in our timberlands, biosolids that are being dumped, fertilizers and sprays. But if we have the ability, which I believe we do, to help this cause, this effort to protect this ecosystem and all the beings that are not able to speak for themselves, that's really what I feel like is part of my job as a tribal member, is to advocate for those that are not able to have a seat at tables and meetings like this, our native species. I've read every single comment, and I'm really pleased that our community that stepped up and made their comments and feelings felt about the negative impacts. And I listened to community members here, and I agree with them wholeheartedly about what they're talking about, the sediments and pollutions, even folks that were opposing saying, you know, boat motors don't pollute that much. They acknowledge they do. And when you look at what your own personal impacts do on a certain particular thing in that frame, you might think, oh, you know, a drop of oil or what do they call it, hydrocarbon or gasoline or lubricants isn't a whole bunch, but folks admittedly talk about the population and the numbers we see of these boats. And this is where our drinking water comes from. This is where we have, for tribal members, coming to name ceremonies in our rivers. It's a living being to us, and we have to do everything we can to protect it. And this is a measured approach. It won't curtail. We're not talking about curtailing fishing. There's still 20 some odd miles of the Sluts River where you can pursue fish with a motorboat. This is the prime spawning area, starting just below Mike's at Jack Morgan Park, running on up. And you know, when I was a kid, I won't go on too long. When I was a kid, the town loop, there were pairs on every riffle. And this is the 90s. You know, you've just seen this decline in summer steelhead schools that would be 80 to 100 in number when they pull up, and they're just not there. And I think a large part of it has to do with the pressure they're under, and propellers turning up sediments and wakes, and just the absolute pressure they're under by folks, you know, using this mechanical advantage to pursue them has a big impact. And I appreciate you listening to me and hearing my words. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for coming today. Alfred Lang?
Mine too.
Those of you that don't know, it's my son. I'm old, but actually, I thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you today about this issue. I agree with the members of our community that these motors should be banned. As my son spoke about too, there's a whole ecosystem out there that actually we're concentrating just on the fish, but for the health and the life of the river, the crawdads. I remember a time when I was a kid, and I've lived in the same spot for almost 50 years on the Sluts River, on James Frank Avenue in town. But when there were enough crawdads for you to go get crawdads to eat, you could actually make a meal out of them for your family. Below my place, there was a long stretch of freshwater mussel that was huge. And this was in the late 60s, early 70s, they began to go away. So there's been lots of different kinds of pressures on them. And what we need to do is make sure that we're not adding on to those pressures. If you look at our water systems, the Siletz tribe and the city of Siletz pumps their water directly out of the same river. So does the cities of Toledo, and they actually sell the seal rock through the same system. Newport does. So we're talking about a river that affects many, many people. It is not just about someone going after some fish. Our Siletz people use the river also in ceremonial ways that you probably have never heard of or would understand in this brief commentary that I can make. But the health of that river is important to us. It is sacred to us. And I don't think that, you know, drifting the river, I've drifted the river many times. I taught my son how to fish. I used to drift with my father-in-law and my uncles. And you can park as long as you want in a riffle and fish it as long. There's no sense in running back up and forth and putting pressure on that same thing. You can drift and you can fish the river thoroughly. And I know lots of fishermen that come out, and we see all them trailers all through town from all over the place come out because of the runs. And the river's ability to support those runs. But that variability, that ability of the river to support those runs is tied to taking care of it. And by taking care of it, would not be churning up these sediments going through these spawning areas. Below my house in Siletz, for years, we used to watch Chinook spawn down there. You hardly ever see them down there anymore. I can look right down the river and you can see those boats going by with their motors. And so without further ado, I just want to reiterate that these things are a lot more than just about fish. It's about fish, and that's a big part of it, but there's a lot more at stake here. It's fresh drinking water. It's all the other beings that live in the river and depend on the river and that ecosystem that need to be protected from the effects of these motors. Thank you, and I'd like to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for coming out today. Angela Sondanon?
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about this important issue.
Can you state your name, please?
My name is Angela Sondanon. I'm the Natural Resources Director for the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. I'm also a tribal member and a PhD level scientist and a certified ecologist and an elder. And I bring all of those roles with me today when I speak to you. I wanted to let you know that the Siletz tribe was quite thoughtful and deliberate in our decision to submit this petition to ban boat motors on the Siletz River. This was not an action of only a few people. It rather was a unanimous recommendation from our Natural Resources Committee with full support from our scientific staff. And that recommendation was taken up by our elected leadership. And they unanimously decided to submit this petition. And when the chairman puts her signature on an action like this, she represents all of our members, all 5,647 of them. She has the weight of our ancestors, our tribal sovereignty, and the well-being of future generations behind her leadership and her decisions. And we have watched as the use on our home river has increased and significantly changed over the years. And it is incumbent upon us as stewards of this sacred river to do our best to treat that river and its life sources in a respectful way with reciprocity and in a manner that ensures its prosperity into the future. What we are seeing now is an overexploitation of our fishery using technologies that are currently unregulated, that is disruptive to other river users and is not sustainable into the future. The fact that this is the fourth petition calling for restrictions of motors on this river in the last 24 years is a clear indication that this issue is real and that it needs to be formally addressed through rulemaking. And this is not an attempt to restrict use or limit use or target specific user groups. We want everyone to enjoy this river. It's sacred to us, and we want to share that with everyone in a very respectful way. But what we're doing with this petition is putting the needs of the river first, which is entirely consistent with our worldview, our cultural commitments, common sense, and sound science. And this morning, I gave to Jennifer a copy of a tribal resolution that outlines our mission statement. And I would like to highlight three components of that mission statement that clearly support this petition. First is stewardship, protecting our sacred relationship with the natural world and ensuring its health for future generations. Second is respect, fostering collaboration and understanding within our community and beyond. Third is sustainability, building a secure and prosperous future based on responsible resource management and cultural preservation. Those are the main tenets that underscore this action by the tribe. And at this time, we respectfully ask the board to affirmatively respond to our petition and open rulemaking on a motor ban on the Siletz River above Jack Morgan Park. It is time, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. Jennifer, the next person I'm going to call is the last person on this sheet. Do we have another sheet of people signed up? And while she's doing that, Curtis Barker. And if you can wait till Jennifer gets back in, that would be great. So we don't have a second. Okay. So this is the last person who signed up to speak today. Go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Curtis Barker. I'm a tribal member and lifelong resident of Siletz. I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. So I'm here today to express our strong support for the proposed motorboat ban on the Siletz River. The Siletz River holds immense cultural, historical, and ecological significance to the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. This river has been the lifeblood of our people for generations of tribal families, providing food, medicine, and spiritual assistance. Our tribal ancestors used the Siletz River not only for subsistence, but also as a central part of our cultural practices. The river is integral to our historical and our heritage, and continues to be an important resource for our community. We've witnessed firsthand the impacts of motorized boating on the Siletz River. The noise, wakes, and disturbance from motorboats disrupt the delicate ecosystem of our river. As our colleagues have just mentioned, it's not just the fish, it's all the species that are in the river. These impacts are particularly concerning for the Chinook salmon and steelhead populations, which are already under stress due to other environmental challenges that we're all well aware of. Furthermore, motorboats introduce a safety concern for our community members, particularly those that rely on non-motorized boats or engage in traditional fishing and gathering activities. Our elders, children, and families use the river for subsistence fishing, recreation, and cultural activities, and their safety and well-being are paramount to us. The presence of motorboats not only creates safety hazards, but also diminishes the peaceful, sacred environment that the river provides for our people. As stewards of this land and water, we believe it's our responsibility to protect the river for future generations. The ban on motorized boats is a necessary step to ensure the lifelong health and sustainability of the river's ecosystem, as well as the continuation of our cultural practices. The tribe expends a great amount of resources and time and money for river and habitat restoration. So we urge the Marine Board to adopt the proposed motorboat ban on the Siletz River. By doing so, we'll make an important step towards safeguarding the river's health, promoting public safety, and honoring the traditions of the Siletz tribe. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that was the last person who signed up to speak. So we're going to move on with our.
And just to highlight something,
Come on.
I never even.
Can we have your name?
It's Cindy Burke, and I never even considered the smaller aquatic wildlife. We moved to the Siletz in 1988, and when we first moved out there, the water skippers, the crawdads were more than abundant. I actually had my toes pinched many times from the crawdads. Now that they have spoken about that, it dawned on me, I haven't seen a crawdad in 2 to 3 years where we're at. There are literally no water skipper, and all the little like pollywog, whatever fishies they were, totally. The small aquatic wildlife is totally gone from 1988 to current. The crawfish are gone, the water skipper's gone, all the small aquatic life are gone on the river.
Thank you. So we're going to go back into our agenda. And first item is the Director's Agency Report.
All right, Chair Jackson, members of the board, Larry Warren, Director of your Oregon State Marine Board. Apologize, I've got a few updates that just didn't make it in the director's report, so this will be a little longer than normal. First and foremost, we have 2 new members that have been appointed to the board. Unfortunately, Member Withy terms out at the end of June. And Member Guzman also terms out at the end of June. And so the two new board members will start effective July 1st. So Member Withy, we get you one more board meeting. So in June. And Fiona Wild, if you remember when we were in Hood River, we got to meet her. She, I think, was in Europe at the time, so we got to meet her over the video. But her organization there in Hood River, we toured with, and she's just an amazing young person that's out there. She's a world-class supper, a world-class wing foiler, running nonprofits, getting her degree, running the world. So she'll be a great addition to us, and I think we owe Member Withy thanks for encouraging her a little bit to apply. So that's great. Appreciate that. The other new member will be Jeff Cunningham, and Jeff Cunningham comes from the Central Oregon area, and he's been involved with the agency over the last handful of years, working on some really complicated issues on Lake Billy Chinook around one of our favorite topics, wake surfing, and really has done a nice job of bringing the community together and working on solving issues without rules. And he's put a lot of time and effort into that. He runs a business called Aquaglide that sells these water bouncy toys, but he's been involved in multiple marine businesses. He's been involved in inflatable kayaks and non-motorized boats. He's just got a breadth of experience there. So they're both super excited. They both bring something really different to the board. And they both got through confirmation without any issues. I think technically the governor hasn't signed, but since it's her recommendations, I just can't imagine she wouldn't sign her own recommendations. And we're already on the process of onboarding. So those two new members, their first meeting will be October. So, and of course, we'll be honoring Member Withy in June for his service. So the next piece, I've been giving the board updates on federal funds. And to just summarize some of the emails I've been giving you and to tell you where we're at right now. Initially, the Coast Guard indicated that there was a pause on giving us the contract grant agreement to get the RBS safety money that we use to fund half the law enforcement state. So in the state, our funding model, half of that's federal funds, half of that's Marine Board funds. That's what's funding the sheriff contracts. Worked through that issue, and then they gave us updated grant agreements a few weeks ago. There was a particular term and condition that is problematic for us and problematic for some other states as well. And so we've been working on that issue, and just yesterday, or the days are running together. This week, we sent a letter to the Coast Guard counter proposing that term and condition and indicating how we would meet the spirit of what they're after, but also following some of our own state laws. So we're awaiting an answer on that. A next step, if they don't accept the counter offer, could potentially be to litigate that term and condition, but candidly, that's a multiple year option, and it would result in not solving this issue in the short term. We were the first state agency to get that particular term and condition, so go Marine Board breaking the ice. But we now know that there's been another organization, we've learned another state agency that has now gotten that same term and condition, and they're learning from us and going to be doing some of the same path. So where we're at today is we're waiting on whether they accept the counter offer. And then if not, we're working through what could be, unfortunately, reducing our law enforcement budget in half, essentially, for our enforcement piece. I want to give a real acknowledgement. Brian's been a real leader on this on the federal level and the national level. The Coast Guard, I think, one time said, "You're the only person complaining," and Brian pointed out, because I'm the only person that understands what's happening so far. And as others began to understand what was happening with the pause, they agreed that they didn't understand. And so really it was some of the first notices that got sent over that unpaused it. And now, again, we're ahead of everybody in terms of counter offering what I know other states have. Some other states have problems with the term and condition. The other piece of that is it's a real complicated issue. Christy and her team have been really involved. As you can imagine, the governor's office trying to coordinate all this, and there's the office of the CFO's got to coordinate this, and there's just a lot of moving pieces. So the two of them are working well together. The agency's positioned well. it's an unfortunate status, and I won't even hazard a guess on what happens with our counteroffer. I hope it's accepted, and I hope we can move forward. And this is just something we had to deal with, but we won't know probably for a while. So our kind of checkpoint is somewhere around the middle of May, where if we don't have certainty, we'll probably have to start taking some more action on what we do with our law enforcement contracts. And Brian's been communicating that to the programs. So not going to be a surprise. Then the next one, we're going to put Priscilla on display. Priscilla Macy is our new BSA coordinator. I first met Priscilla 7 years ago in this room, brand new director. She came to a town hall, and she's just a really amazing advocate out there for, in particular, her community, but really all boating. She does a lot of whitewater kayaking, probably some rafting, and a little bit of everything. Really, when the position came open and Priscilla asked me what I thought about her applying, I thought, boy, that's a good sign of where the Marine Board's at, that someone of her quality and caliber is interested in this position. So I think when we envision the BSA program and where it's headed and the coordination, people like Priscilla are exactly who we thought would be good people in these programs. So I'll let her say, if you want to say anything, Priscilla, you can. You don't have to.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Still on trajectory of running my own business, being a whitewater guide, running nonprofit programs for various groups, and being an advocate for recreation and conservation broadly at the state and at the national level. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy with where the Marine Board is going. I'm happy with their collaborative nature and how they engage with the various interest groups and user types that we all are fortunate to be able to be a part of and sometimes manage. So thank you for letting me be here. Happy to be here. Nice to meet all of you. Thanks for your work. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to open the book. Welcome.
The only downside to Priscilla is I think she went to Oregon State. So
Yeah.
we're going to forget that.
I'm still paying them for my education. So.
And then Brian or Priscilla, I know we've got a couple of the BSAs here. If you want to introduce I see at least two of them sitting around the corner there. Might be nice to introduce.
Yeah, Chair Jackson, members of the board, wanted to introduce
Oh, there are more.
three BSA. Kim McKay, Jeff Holter, this is gonna be their third season with us for the seasonal boating safety advocate, and then Emily, this is her second season. So all three returning BSAs, which is fantastic. Then we also have another seasonal boating safety advocate that starts next week on May 1st. So we went through the recruitment, and we're really excited to get started. We have a significant amount of events. You know, it seems like every year we do this, we have more people that are interested in having us at events. And so the program just continues to grow and have measurable.
And Brian, since you're on a roll, do you want to just talk about, I know you talked to the board back in January about hiring strategy, just if you want to just briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So the board members back in January, part of my presentation on BSAs was giving the board's blessing on looking at 2 full-time boating safety advocate positions. And at that time, the board approved. We continue to work through the HR components of that and really the budget and so forth. We, through the different processes, we're gonna have to go back to our LFO essentially in July, and that's when we can take off. So trajectory, if everything goes well, we'll be recruiting for 2 full-time BSAs, probably about September.
Let me make a comment. I really appreciate you guys taking on these tasks. You represent the board. You are a face to the voting public. Your positions are very, very important. And I think it's going to improve and help our relationship with voters on the water and hopefully make it safer and lead to less conflicts that we're seeing on the water. But I really appreciate you guys taking on this role. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To build on what Member Withy said, I also appreciate the fact that I'm seeing 3 familiar faces there, because that also means that you guys are ready to go out and hit the water running, hit the ground running, as opposed to having to go through and train another crop of people. Is the 4th person also a repeat?
The 4th person is not.
Okay. So yeah, so you can get out there and really start delivering the message. And you already know what works, what doesn't work, how to engage with different audiences, all that kind of stuff. So really happy to see Three Faces coming back for another year.
Thank you. Thank you for your support and your time.
Yes, thank you. One question. Brian, do we anticipate, and I think beyond this in January, so sorry if I'm picking you again, do we anticipate some presence in the Southern Oregon region, especially with water bodies being full for the first time, increased conflict on the road, et cetera?
Yeah, the Chair Jackson member labor. So one thing that's awesome about the PSA program is very nimble. And so we do have plans for certain waterways and areas that we honestly the last couple of summers haven't been able to resources. So yes, there are plans in the works. And if there's any specific waterway or something that comes up, just either through Jennifer, Larry, or even email me directly, I can make sure it happens. Thank you.
There are also schools we've already set up appointments to go see in the Southern Oregon.
Great, thank you.
And I'd like to add, I think you're from Medford,
Yes,
Grants Pass.
yes.
Roseburg family.
So we got some Southern Oregon representation here, so. Thank you.
The fires prevented us last year.
Yeah.
So we talked about hitting that a little bit earlier.
We had it scheduled and lit up like a Christmas tree.
That sounds great.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments for them? Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you.
And then just two more, sorry again, I apologize, this running long on my side. Legislative session still going, full steam. We're past the halfway point, and we're in the bubble where what really is happening in the session world is we're waiting for the May forecast, because that's when they stop doing everything and start fighting about money. And so what happens in this little window is there's a lot of policy and ideology type bills that are fighting that don't involve the money while they wait on that May forecast to know what they have to spend. Our agency is in good shape. To be very clear, there was a bill, Senate Bill 301, that was related to wake surfing in the Newburgh Pool. That bill is dead. There's no opportunity for that to continue. So we won't have that bill to work through this session. Our own bills, the guide bill and our budget bill, are right where they need to be. We're just hanging tight, and Christine and her team are doing everything they can to remind them we're ready to go. When they're ready to go, everything's great on that side. And then the ones that we're watching that aren't our bills, so we don't actively promote them or push them, but they relate to us. There's a few different bills around aquatic invasive species. That topic's really caught hold this session. I think there's been a recognition that, Oregon is so good about how we treat our environment and how we care about it. And so I think it surprises legislators when they ask, are other states doing their part? And we have to say yes, but we're not as a state. We're actually behind on checkpoints and things like that. So there's been some real energy and leadership at the legislative level on those issues. So there's bills around contracting. There's bills that would raise some of the boater fees, remove the 10-foot restriction on the waterway access, which would provide more money to invasive species. It would also provide more money to our waterway access grant as a side piece. So we're going to be watching those. I think there's good energy around them, but they're not our bills, so I won't predict what problems they do or don't have. I would say the sponsors of those bills are probably feeling good about where they're at, but that doesn't mean they're all the way home yet. So that's the main pieces of session. And then just finally, one of the things we haven't talked a lot about here is there were some new laws passed around serial communication and how boards can talk to each other that just really change the way that can be done. And there's starting to be some training out there. I finally was able to get some training myself from our DOJ council. They came to our natural resource cabinet and talked to all of us and gave us some really good information. And I think it would be a good training for the board. And Jennifer and I talked a few weeks ago with 2 new board members coming on, that maybe in October, if the board's okay with it, we would have an agenda item around this topic, and then maybe just kind of some general ideas around that, where we could provide some training on some of the updated laws around serial communication and board. We didn't feel like doing it in June and then having 2 new members start would be super advantageous. So if the board's okay with that, we would love to put that on the list for an October agenda item. And with that,
Great idea.
yeah, with that, I will apologize again for having so many extras and take any questions.
Any questions?
No, a few things.
Go for it.
The new board members. I would encourage the board and staff here to orient the new board members before they arrive. A couple of years ago, we had an open house where we got to meet the staff, learn what the staff did, and gain an appreciation for how the staff operated. That's very beneficial. And it would be very helpful to these board members, I think, if you did something like that. And really, we have 4 fairly new board members.
Yeah.
And I think it would help Dak, Steve, if they did that. You get to know the people that work here, what they do. So if you have time to do that, I would appreciate it. I think it would be very helpful to the new members and how the board operates. When I started, I walked into the Newberry pool,
Yeah, you did.
wakeboarding.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about it. I did know the staff. So I'm sitting there trying to learn how to spell OSMB, and I'm in the middle of this conflict. So it'd be very helpful because these board members that are coming on are going to have a conflict they're going to have to deal with right away. You know, we're talking about a couple today. So, it'd be very helpful if you did that. So that's just a suggestion.
Didn't,
Pardon?
I'm trying to remember, after we had that one a couple of years ago, didn't we say we were gonna maybe make that every 2 or 3 year thing?
Sure. So Chair Jackson, I've got it noted. We'll work with the members to set it up and see whether, I mean, of course, anytime any member is welcome to come by the office and set up time, we'll see if there is enough scheduling to where we could do like a day, or if people want to come up individually, but we'll work with people to do that. Sure. Because I agree, member, with you, it's helpful.
Anything else?
Yeah, a couple of things. Is there any update on the Pearl River from what we approved the rule last meeting? I don't know if you have any feedback from the community or any updates from what's going on.
Member Withy, first off, staff did a great job getting signage and information out right after, so that there was really not much of a gap from the board meeting to the time somebody would go to the boat ramp and see the new rules and post it. And of course, there was media involvement and outreach. We haven't heard a lot. I think that some of that's probably due to the fact that the prime boating season hasn't started yet. I know that we've been educating, we've reached out to some of the commercial operator in that area and really gotten the information out in the community. And, we'll be learning this boating season, I think, as things get moving down there. But,
so when we take action on a rule like that, it's nice to have feedback how well it's being accepted in the area.
We'll revisit that in January, right?
We will, member, yes.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about law enforcement. I stated this before, and I continue to state that I am extremely impressed with the training that we put on for law enforcement. I think it's crucial that we continue doing this, and we have a law enforcement community that's very gifted and skilled and taking on their task. So kudos again to Eddie. I can't say enough about him, and then you too, Brian, for putting on all these courses, training sessions. I think it's key to our mission. So I really appreciate that, and pass it down the line, if you will. Thank you very much. And we have training come up in Madras. I'll try to attend where I can, and I will encourage the new board members to attend and partake in especially the swimming pool part of it. So you'll learn how to survive in the water, if you will. So thank you, Brian. I say this repeatedly at almost every meeting. I am very impressed with the number of projects we've taken on. We have a fairly small staff, and we seem to be all over the place doing the things that need to be done out there, providing facilities to our boating community. So again, Janine, thank you for your efforts, and please acknowledge your staff. They're doing super work. And with that, I'm going to call it a day.
Okay, thank you, member with it. One thing for Dax and Steve also is, as Craig mentioned, you are welcome to go to any of the law enforcement training, not just the Madras 2-week academy, but drift boat, jet boat, and personal watercraft is happening in mid-May at Oregon City. The one thing that we do have to be a little bit conscious of is quorums. So as Craig mentioned, he's going to try to go to, he said in the first week. I'm going to be there Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of the second week. So if you're thinking of going to the Madras training, you may want to check in with Jennifer to make sure that we're not going to run into any issues with it.
I don't plan on going to that one, but I do plan on attending a day or two of the drift boat training in June. I believe that is on the road, since it's in the road, home turf. That's right.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, maybe just budget type questions for the report, if you don't mind. So a couple of revenue questions that I picked up on in the report was that it seems like our waterway access program sales down compared to last year, and I'm referencing the page, top of page 5, that first paragraph, where it states that, you know, we get a pretty good chunk of those in the fourth quarter, preparing for 2.8 million in sales, would require 661,000 in fourth quarter sales. The agency saw 568,000 in fourth quarter sales last year. So I guess my question is, are we seeing a decline in waterway access program sales, or is that just an anomaly?
I see a couple people looking. If nobody wants to take it, I'll jump in. So I think member Lambert, one thing is right. The program is still new, so we're still learning about the timing of when people buy the permits. We've got the 1 year, 2 year. We've got the shorter term as well. So I think candidly, it's just I don't think we're at a point where we're saying it's in a declining mode. I think we're still in a learning mode about how the revenue flows and comes in the 1 years and 2 years and the timing of when people purchase the permits. And so I don't think that we've sounded any alarms that this isn't in a declining mode. And we also had, you know, there's a new program, you get a little lift, everybody learns about it. And so I think that's how I would characterize where we're.
No concern. That sounds good to me. And then in Christie's budget graphs on page 11, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I couldn't help but notice that we're closing up to the end of the biennium, and the fuel tax end of things, we only receive 47% of projected fuel tax revenues. Is that an alarm?
Member Lambert, should be. No, we do a fuel tax calculation. So there's the studies done by Oregon State every 4 years. We request the money from ODOT only once a year. So we'll do one more request before the biennium ends. ODOT's usually good for the money. So it's more just a calculation and a move. So that's one of those. It's actually one of the things that makes our budget challenge, why we're so lucky to have Preston down in our accounting team, because accounts like flatline projections and that revenue source it's a hit, and then you go a year without another hit, and then we get it again. So we'll get one more big distribution for the years or for the bienniums.
So it's an annual transfer, basically.
Yes.
Okay. One other question on page 21 under the retained recruit reactivation focus end of things. I want to make sure I understand that right. So it shows that boat registration numbers are continuing to decline across the state. Is this effort going towards getting new boaters, or is this effort going towards getting current boat owners who don't have their boats registered to get back on the water and register their boats?
Typically the reactivation, and when we do the work with RBS, it's around getting people that have a boat that probably should be registered, or they've just stopped using it for whatever reason, and reminding them, you know, boating's cool, you should register your boat and go use it. So it's really focused on that reactivation. In terms of building new boaters, that's always a conversation. We've had it at the board, we've had it with staff managers. It's a challenging one, right, as to where is our role to build boaters, right? And how do you do that? How do we convince somebody? So some of our grants that we've been able to do through the Waterway Access Program have been good to expose people. And we think of it like they might not leave one of those grant funded things and go buy a kayak or a boat the next day, but maybe down the road, they're interested in boating and got a good exposure. So those are areas where we're trying to grow people into boating as well, but we're always open to any ideas to how to grow that boating community. But the reactivation's a big one. It's probably easier to convince somebody to get their boat registered and start using it than it is to get somebody to go out and buy a boat and start boating.
Understood. Okay, thanks for clarification. That's all.
Thanks, Jim. And I asked Larry my questions and he addressed them in his addendum to his presentation. So I think we're all good. Our next item is the ARPA update with Phil. Click slideshow up at the top bar.
Yeah. See it. Thank you. Okay, great. Chair Jackson, members of the Oregon State Marine Board, good morning. I'm Phil Hedspeth. I'm your boating policy and environmental coordinator on Alan's team. So I'm here to give you the summary of the expenditure of the ARPA report for removing abandoned derelict vessels on the Willamette River in the metro area. Before I jump into this, I get the privilege of giving this presentation, but there were a lot of hands that were involved in the lift to remove these ADVs. And so this is the takeaway slide. So over the period of 3 years, with the $1 million that was directed to the Marine Board, we removed a total of 88 vessels, including 44 in 2024, 25 in 2023, and, or excuse me, 19, and then in the year before that, there was 23 ADVs. As I was saying, I get the privilege of giving this report, but there were a lot of people at the Marine Board that were involved in this. And I'd like to acknowledge the work that Brian and his team did, especially Alicia on our team. Our wonderful procurement person, Sydney, was on maternity leave, and Alicia stepped in and made sure that our first our request for quotes and all this were in line with state policy, that the bids were acceptable, our process to review those, and I couldn't have done it without Alicia helping us out. Brian worked to make sure that we were able to get on boats with the law enforcement team and get out and to identify these abandoned derelict vessels, start tagging them and getting them removed. Also, I'd like to thank Christy and her team, just because they were very much aware of the funds that we had, keeping us on track on extending those funds. And Preston, Sydney, Kansas, they were all great to work with and make sure that we were following our DAS agreements and honoring our vendors, our contractors that we're working with, and making sure that we're getting those resources out and utilized. Also, Andrew and Melinda over in boating registration and titling, they worked to give me access to our database and making sure that I could look these boats up, do the appropriate notifications there. Oh, and I also wanted to acknowledge our wonderful public information officer, Ashley Massey. She was putting out the information on social media and also on our website as far as when we tag an abandoned derelict vessel and going through our notification processes. I'd like to thank Janine for knowing everybody in the Oregon recreational boating community and her insights into how to navigate this new horizon for myself. And I do want to thank my manager, Alan and Glenn, for their insights. And then Director Warren for his clear direction and expectations on how we utilize these funds to spend these resources. So the
boat on the bottom right is the boat that Chair Jackson called in to report. This is the one that sunk in the Holgate Channel. And so we were able to get that one removed there.
And it's amazing to see how big it really was.
Yeah.
Because all I could see sticking out of the water was probably about 3 feet and the railing around the bow of the boat. We had no idea how big it was.
Right, and it was at a time when there was a lot of water there and as it came down. So, and of course, this is one that we had to have slung out there. So how did we get these resources? The state received these dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act. They were directed, the state legislature had funds that were directed to the state senators and state representatives. Senator Taylor directed $1 million to the State Marine Board. You can see her district in the Portland metro area, and it's bordered on the Willamette River. And that does include Ross Island, which is kind of ground zero for abandoned derelict vessels, and the Holgate Channel there. So Senator Taylor directed those resources to us. One of the things I was remiss in, or group that I was remiss in acknowledging their help and support was mine and Alan's predecessors, Josh and Dorothy. And Josh and Dorothy, they did the lion's share of this work as far as in removing ADVs. Dorothy has been a great mentor for me, and she continues to mentor me. I meet weekly with Josh, Dorothy, and their colleague, Kevin McAfee, to talk about ADVs and just get on the same page. One of the things that they did is they set up the Department of Administrative Services preferred vendor list. And this way it streamlined the process when we were going out for a quote to remove ADVs. And there was a set of requirements that these contractors had to meet to be able to contract with the state to remove ADVs. And that is, you know, they had to have the capability to remove vessels of a certain size. They had to make sure that they had the storage capability or a plan to store ADVs. Also, it would include an assessment of the type of the boats are coming out, an assessment for hazardous materials. So there's a lot of times when we pull these ADVs out, there's syringes, there's propane tanks, gasoline tanks, all sorts of nasty things in there. So be able to assess those things and be able to dispose of them. And then making sure that they have the appropriate insurances and liability coverages to remove ADVs. Some of the ADVs that we did remove over the last couple of years were newsworthy. These are 2 boats that were pulled in the Portland metro area that had caught on fire at one point or the other. And these were part of that 88 boats that were removed. So of the vessels that we removed last year, about 30%, or excuse me, of the vessels removed over the last 3 years, about 30% of the boats were sailboats. They were all fiberglass boats. Most of them were in the range of between 30 and 50 years old. They ranged between 20 and 30 feet. We did have a few boats that were over 30 feet in length. Bottom left corner, that is Chair Jackson's boat. So these are cabin cruisers that we removed. About 20% of the cabin cruisers, 20% of the overall boats that we removed were cabin cruisers. They typically were a lot bigger boats, between 22 to 42 feet, and they were typically older boats. We did have one wooden cabin cruiser, but the rest of them were fiberglass boats. And then approximately 50% of the boats that we removed were open motor boats. Between 12 and 18 feet, 30 to 50 years old, all of them were fiberglass boats. And then one other boat that we did remove is the motor vessel Denali. And this was a 82-foot wooden vessel that was sunk at approximately river mile number 19 on the Multnomah Channel of the Willamette River. There is an interesting history about this vessel. Allegedly, it was owned by Al Capone at one point. Not really sure if that's true or not. It was conscripted into the Navy Coastal Defense Forces during the Second World War and was based out of San Francisco for coastal marine patrols. As I pointed out, this vessel sunk in the Multnomah Channel. Ballard Marine Construction was the company that was hired to remove this. They had to go out and stage multiple barges to pull the vessel out. You can see the bottom right-hand corner with the two twin diesel engines. Those were the ones that the Navy installed in that vessel during the Second World War. So a little bit of nautical history there. As mentioned, about 50% of all the vessels that were removed were open motor boats. Open motor boats are typically easier to get out of the water. The majority of the vessels that I was overseeing being removed, we were fortunate they were close to being at boat ramps. Like Cathedral Park was just kind of ground zero for a lot of abandoned derelict vessels. So it's easier for a contractor to get these boats out. They're easier to be able to pull up onto the back of a flatbed or into a trailer, and easier to essentially dispose of there. Like I said, most of these were around Cathedral Park, and then there were some over on Swan Island. Sailboats present a greater challenge to remove, based on their overall size and having a keel. A lot of times they have a mast that's still attached there. You can see the boat on the left. This is the one that was featured in the news story in the second or third slide. This is a 30-foot Catalina boat. They had to bring in a tractor trailer and an appropriate type of trailer to get that boat out of the water. The sailboat on the right had to be pulled out of the water using the slings at Ballard Marine Construction there. Cabin cruisers are also a bit of a challenge to pull out. This is the same cabin cruiser in 4 different images. This is one that was sunk up on the Multnomah Channel. Is a 42-foot wooden Chris Craft vessel built in the 60s. And it's definitely a little bit more of a challenge to get up out of the water there. The number of ADVs that were around Cathedral Park definitely got some newsworthy attention because there were about 6 ADVs that were adjacent to the boat ramp. 3 on the north side, 2, and then another 3 on the south side of it, and a couple closer to including a couple closer to the bridge. You can essentially see the before and after photos. Upper left-hand corner, 3 boats that are adjacent to the boat ramp, then the one on the right, another cabin cruiser, and then around that bend there were 2 more boats. You can see the boats after they've been removed there just a short time later. And then there was celebration for the swim dock that was opened up at Cathedral Park there, and without the ADVs. We did partner with the Department of State Lands, and this is where our relationship with Josh and Dorothy at the Department of State Lands has really become very critical. As we were winding up the $1 million that we had to spend on from the ARPA dollars, we had just over $100,000 left, and we had targeted 9 abandoned derelict vessels that were in the Multnomah Channel. And the bids came in significantly higher than what we had anticipated. And this is where that relationship that we have with our partners at Department of State Lands, and I always explain to them that we're going to have to cut back on the number of boats that we could pull out of the Columbia, or excuse me, out of the Multnomah Channel. And Josh said, well, let's partner on these. And so we were able to we ended up pulling 8 boats out of the Columbia River, or sorry, Multnomah Channel. We pulled 8 boats there. So this is all part of that project. And you can, in the picture in the upper right-hand corner, you can see just the head of the diver as they were working to get slings on that motorboat that was coming out. The sailboat that's on the bottom left, that was a bonus boat that we got to discover. If you see on the back of that barge, there's a boat that's on its transom. That boat, the boat that's on the barge was the one that we were anticipating removal. When they were lifting that boat out, that sailboat was tied off underneath it. And so when they started pulling it up, there was an immediate sheen on the water. Now you can see that the contractor had containment booms in the water. We did report it to DSL, or excuse me, Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. There was a report on that. It was all basically contained in that area. But we ended up having to leave a boat, actually leave 2 boats, sunk sailboats, because we needed to deal with this boat, because we automatically had issues to deal with on that boat, and we couldn't just put it back there. But again, that's where our partnership with DSL worked out great, and we're able to remove these ADVs and get all those. And I am currently working with DSL for those 2 sailboats that we couldn't get pulled out in October, and we're looking to go out and get those removed for the end of this biennium. This is just some of the news coverage that was generated on the removal of those 9 ADVs, and it was really 8 because we had to put the 2 sailboats back there. Our ADV work does continue. I was out with Deputy Blake in Lincoln County on Uquina Bay. He had identified a vessel on the water as a potential abandoned derelict vessel. We were trying to work with a person that had ownership to the boat, even though it was not registered in their name. And before they could essentially get the boat moved, it sank. And this is a vessel that we'll pay for out of the abandoned derelict vessel sub-account there. Deputy Blake did a tremendous amount of work to get this boat finding contractors to be able to refloat the boat, pump it out, and then he towed it personally back to a dock where the Port of Newport pulled the boat out and then crushed it there. Deputy Blake, by the way, we're working on another boat to get removed right now, and he sends his regards to the board today. So that's my last slide. I'll have to take any questions that you might have. Remember with it.
I'm a little confused about our role versus DSL's role in this program. I'd understood they pretty much took it with them when they transferred, but that apparently isn't true. So could you explain how our role compares to their role? Is there an overlap?
Yeah, remember with the, yes, sir, our primary focus with the $150,000 that are allotted to the Marine Board over the course of the biennium is to work with our law enforcement partners to remove ADVs. That might be an environmental hazard or impact the navigation there. And so that's where, like with this project, Deputy Blake, he did all the lead work. We're reimbursing the county. But the Department of State Lands is the primary agency for the state to remove ADVs statewide.
So that's great. And I would just add to that, remember in the case of the ARPA funds, which we just went through, that money was given to the Marine Board before DSL had, so we still had the funds and the obligation to expend the ARPA funds. And as Phil mentioned, did that in partnership with DSL as they ramped up their programs as well.
So was the program transferred to DSL when Josh Dorothy moved over?
So DSL, when they moved over, they created a program that the DSL had gotten designated for them, and they've gotten some money associated with that. I think it was $15 million or so that was dedicated for them. And as Phil was did a great job of describing, we still have funds, 150,000 that go to the ADV. It's just we'll work in go back to a more limited capacity of using that money and always working with DSL issues.
So when we spend 150,000, are we done with the program?
Until the next budget cycle.
Okay.
wasn't the money that went to DSL came from some other bigger legal settlement, et cetera, that landed in if I remember correctly, it landed in DSL's lap. So they didn't really like take a program. DSL had a program that they needed somebody to run.
It just seems to me that Dorothy was more involved, more engaged in this program, and had more money than we do now. I have no objection with it being in DSL. I'm just trying to understand what our role is versus theirs.
Our amount of money has been fairly steady, other than the infusion of ARPA. And Chair Jackson, you're correct. It was I might not say this quite correctly, but the Monsanto funds, there was a lawsuit around some of the Superfund site in Willamette. And DSL recognized a need for a statewide coordinated ADV program. And so they built that and got some of those Monsanto funds dedicated to that purpose. And so that piece also allows them in their capacity to apply for grants. There was oftentimes NOAA grants that just nobody would apply for it. They'd be begging people to apply. And so by having that centralized state program at DSL, they can apply for some of those federal grants and do that type of work. And the Marine Board will go back to using our limited funds in situations where it helps that recreational boating or marine law enforcement partners.
So have we removed all of Chair Jackson's votes?
Actually, there's one more that I reported that hasn't been removed yet, that you and I talked about back in January.
We'll have to revisit that one.
The mast is still there.
Oh, is this the Multnomah channel?
I'll get.
Oh, okay. Oh,
The green
yes,
sail-
DSL's
the
working on that one. We,
formerly green sailboat in the whole day.
yes, Chair Jackson, if you recall, Chair Jackson went out with us in the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office River Patrol back in June, and we tagged 28 vessels in a single day. And that vessel was tagged. The boat has subsequently sank in the Holgate Channel. It is on DSL's list to get removed. So
Yeah, it got lots of tags on it,
yes,
on the mast.
yeah, it collects tags, but hopefully they'll have it removed somewhat soon.
Cool.
So I have a couple questions. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
No, go for it.
One, can you educate me just on how does this process flow from when a boater sees a derelict sunken vessel, right? And they report, I'm assuming they report that to the local marine patrol. And then is it led by the county or OSP? Like, what does that process look like from start to boat being?
Member Lambert, thank you for your question, sir. It can go multiple ways. So the Marine Board has a report a boater, and we do get reports that come through on that is filtered through Brian and comes to Alan and I. And, and then we will look to respond accordingly. Oftentimes that will go through the Sheriff's Office Marine Patrol, and they will notify us as well. So, like with Deputy Blake here, he'll see a vessel, he'll contact us, and then, and they have the authority, obviously, to tag the vessel, and then we can start the process there. I tend to work with some of the Sheriff's Office patrols, and like for this particular vessel, there are it's a multiple step notification. We tag the vessel, then there's a pre-seizure letter that's issued. We send it to the last registered owner in the database. There's a 10 business day process there. If we don't get a response from them, then we can go to seizure. Then there's a 30-day clock that starts at that point as far as until the boat can be destroyed. And we can actively remove the boat after the 10 business days. And the person will have the right to request a hearing. At that time, they've got 10 business days after the boat's been seized. They have to pay for storage, removal, towing, any of fees associated with it, and provide proof of ownership of that vessel, and then they can have access back to it. By the time we tag most of these boats, no one wants these boats.
Yeah. So in the case of a county, if the county has jurisdiction over Marine Patrol, are they contracting with that provider preferred list, or does the state contract with them? How does that?
Member Lambert, typically it is the county that's working directly with that contract. And so with Deputy Blake here, He works directly with the port. He's the one that hired the contractor that put the diver on the water to raise the boat. He's the one that hired the company to pump it out, and he actually towed it, saving the state quite a bit of money.
So, last comment. This long, I'm in my day job working with the legislature on a similar mirrored package for abandoned RVs in our right of way and in our public spaces, right? So we're trying to get the state to set up a fund for that through ODOT. Two things. One, they always reference, well, look at the Marine Board's program. So it appears to me in my conversations with elected officials, you guys have a lot of trust, right, with that, what we've been able to do here with abandoned derelict vessels. The second comment that I hear a lot of is, well, why, is there any attempt to find the owner of that RV and hold them accountable? So some of these boats obviously are 50, 60 years old, been in the water. For more recent boats, are we attempting to contact those folks and take legal action to get the money back? Or are we just using the funding that we got?
Director Lambert, or excuse me, Member Lambert, we do make an attempt to contact the last registered owner. But like in this vessel, as an example, the last registered owner was multiple years ago, and this boat had been passed on along at least twice there. So it's very difficult to go back and track this. And one of the challenges is that when the person that took ownership of this vessel, they never registered in their name. And so it's a little challenging to be able to go back to them.
It sounds like the exact same problem we're having with the RVs.
Very much so. I think it's a very fair comparison, and I've heard that before from our law enforcement partners.
Thank you.
Member Lambert, I would say if there was a area I could wave a wand and fix, it would actually be the cost of disposal. That becomes a barrier. I know in the RV, having talked to some of the folks in that world, and ours is just, even somebody trying to do the right thing, sometimes, some dumps won't take a boat unless you sawzall it up and then it's not a boat. Some will. So we hear some that are a couple $100 and some a couple thousand. And even in our own pursuit as a government entity, sometimes it's difficult to get somebody to take, So, if I was personally to focus on one piece of the puzzle, it would be it would be great if there was some economical way for people to be able to get rid of those cheaper than leaving them on the side of the road or selling them on Craigslist for $1.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then I was just going to add, Chair Jackson, Phil did a good job of acknowledging everybody else, but I think on Phil's first day of the job, I probably said, hey, we got to spend $1 million by this date, and it's harder than you think, but you got to do it or bad things happen. And he did. And so he stepped in and did a really great job, because we were working on a clock, and it is harder to spend $1 million than you would think, especially with state contracting and the moving dynamic area. And it would have been a negative on our reputation to have Senator Taylor trust us with $1 million of funds and not use that wisely. So Phil did a great job of making sure we did that.
Any other questions or comments for Phil? So let's do one more item and then we'll take a break. So we're going to do the Lake Oswego update. Alan?
Absolutely.
First, want to thank Director Warren, because Phil thanked everybody. I was going to have to thank him, but that was the last one I was going to do. For the record, my name's Alan Hansen. I'm the your policy and environmental manager for the Marine Board. So in the board report, I provided an update on Lake Oswego. So as we're aware, there's been a long-standing lawsuit to determine whether the lake is public or not, and that came down in the public's favor. And so the court ordered that the lake be accessible by the public. And so they ordered the city of Lake Oswego to make that public. And the city is working on access through a small park called Millennium Plaza Park. It's not a really great boating facility, to say the least. So it's a small park. The parking is across the street. So anybody who's going to use it has to carry their vessel across the street through the park. There's a series of, they call them platforms. they're steps. They can't call them steps because they're not ADA steps, but a series of steps down into the water. They have some art, which are metal cattails, and I think they originally put in to restrict access through that water or through those steps. So they've been ordered to remove those. So we're working with the city. Brian's and Janine have worked with the city extensively to help develop some rules for access. They've issued those rules. And I think at this point, they're probably not the rules we would have picked, but I don't think they're unreasonable. Because at some point, you have the conflict. Are they making rules for the water body, or are they making rules for the access? They're entitled to make rules for the access. We make the rules for the water body. But they've made rules that there's no motorized craft can launch. And I think there's an 18-foot limit on the length of the vessels, and there's timelines. I think they also required that anything that goes off those steps has to be U.S. Coast Guard approved. So they're restricting, truck tires, et cetera. We've looked at those rules. I don't think any of them are egregious where they cross the line between regulating waterways and regulating access. So at this point, I don't think we anticipate trying to challenge any of those rules. We do anticipate that there will be some violations, but the nice thing is those are city rules. So the city law enforcement has the authority to enforce those. So we're not going to be involved with that. I've had extensive conversations with the Lake Corps. If you're not aware, historically, they were the boating regulator for the private lake. They have substantial regulations on what can and can't be done, and including various levels of penalties. And I was talking with Chair Jackson before the meeting. I said I would love to be able to use some of their regulations, because if they have a bad actor, they charge with points, and if they get so many violations, they get ejected from the waterway for a couple weeks up to a full season. So they have a lot more tools than we do as a state agency, which is fine. They've talked to us about updating our rules. The rules we have in place are from, I believe, 1975. So what I've talked to the Lake Corps is our preference would be to watch access this summer to see what issues exist. And then once we've identified what's going to be appropriate for the water body, we may come back to the board and ask if we can update our rules to be more in line with a lot of the rules are and are appropriate. The Lake Corps is also concerned about bad actors coming onto the waterway, specifically PWCs. They requested that we do an emergency rule to ban PWCs, which we haven't seen PWCs on the water, so we really don't have an existing emergency situation. I did let them know if they had an emergency situation, they could petition us. And if the director and the board determined that they are an emergency, we can't issue temporary rules. Like I said, the city banned any sort of motorized vessel, so PWCs don't have legal access to the lake. So I really don't anticipate a lot of issues with PWCs, but again, we'll watch and see what they have going. And we worked with the city, provided some signage for water rules. We put standard, carriage requirements, life jackets, whistles. We also, one of their rules is they have a line of buoys going around the perimeter of the lake. Their paddle craft can't go outside of those buoys. And so in our rules, we had a recommendation that paddlers stay within the shoreline and the buoys, just to be consistent. And the lake is heavily boated with towed water sports, and towed water sports are in the center of the lake. So it's a general recommendation. We make that recommendation for paddlers in general. So it's not inconsistent with what we have done in the past. So we went ahead and recommended that that be part of their signage. So I think at this point, we're just watching to see what happens this summer. And if we have issues, we'll bring those to the board at that time. If we have requests for rules, that will be at a future date.
I'm a little confused. You said towed water sports are in the center of the lake,
Yes.
but no motors are allowed in the lake.
So I apologize, Member Withy. So there's only one public access, and that public access does not have a boat ramp. And so there's no place for the public to launch a boat. Now, there are various boat launches that are owned by the Lake Corps private residents. And so the homeowners still have access to launch motorized vessels. And they're still subject to the Lake Corps rules. So they have a speed restriction, they have ballast restrictions, you know, they have to be registered, they have to prove that they have a boater's license, and that's all done through the Lake Corps. But I believe they also have to pay a substantial assessment to be able to use the lake, and very heavily restriction on who's a member of the Corps, who has the appropriate easements. And that remains in place. We just have the one public access location.
So what's the concern about personal watercraft? Numbers, noise, activity, careless boating? What's the concern?
I
The short answer is
Jackson, yes. Yes. And I think from the Lake Corps' perspective, they've always had very tight controls on what goes on in the lake. And so I think they're nervous about how that lake is going to change. And so I think they're just trying to, you know, impose as many of their rules to their members on the public as they can. And of course, you know, we can't impose a lot of the rules that they have. But I think, you know, for us, it's appropriate that we watch for a season, see what the trends are. And then if we do need to make rules, we can at a later date.
So if I may, for an example, a friend of mine's family has a house on the lake. They have a boathouse on the lake, and they have 2 motorized boats that they keep in that boathouse and used. They probably lived there for 30 years. My friend is a paddler. She cannot go visit her parents and bring her outrigger canoe and launch it from her dad's yard unless she has a sticker on it. She can't invite her friends to bring their outrigger canoes and have a group outrigger canoe paddle on the lake because we don't have stickers on our boats. Now, as I understand it, with this change in rule, Lynn can invite her friends and we can bring our outrigger canoes and we can all go out on the lake.
My understanding, Chair Jackson, is that the friends, if they have the ability to go access the public park, Millennium Park, and their craft meet those restrictions, they can.
Okay, so we can't, the public invited guests to a member of the HOA still can't launch
So
private property.
I'm not going to interpret the HOA rules, but I for your friend's parents' sake, I would recommend getting clarification. And the way their points work is the points belong to the host or the property. So if your friends all get a violation, that's the property owner's violation. So if it was enough points, they could restrict him from launching his boats.
But it's also interesting they put 18 feet because that takes out almost all surf skis and all outrigger canoes.
Question, and maybe Janine knows this answer.
Janine knows everything.
Being as somebody said, she knows every recreational state. Being a land manager in Oregon for the last 25 plus years, I don't remember ever seeing anything where a municipal jurisdiction limited what could be put in the water from their property. Unless obviously you're driving across a ball field to launch a boat, right? I mean, you could carry a small boat with an electric motor put that in the water and take off. Is there precedence, or is this precedent setting? And that makes me nervous that the city of Lake Oswego is effectively controlling what happens on the water based off what they're allowing to happen on their land to access.
Yeah.
Go ahead and call it
Go.
up, Jenny.
Okay.
You're also.
So for the record, Jean Villette, Boating Facilities Program Manager. There are a few isolated cases, most of them are on small lakes, where the land managing agency has looked at the lake and as well as their infrastructure, what size of things could be accommodated for safe parking use, and they've set a length limit. Most of it are on areas where it's non-motorized boating. You see a lot of friendly suggestions where we'll see folks will say, this is a great place for small boats or small trailered boats, but it's not necessarily enforceable, at least my understanding, but I've also never heard of anyone challenging that by trying to launch a 26-foot boat into areas. This property is very unusual. It's bordered and encompassed by a railroad right-of-way, a street. It's a very small piece of property. And so for the city to restrict motorized boats, it makes sense. There's no place to maneuver. I suppose some very industrious people could carry a heavier boat across, but this is really more suitable for paddle craft.
So one of those fold-up type boats with a little electric motor on the back that could easily be carried there, that wouldn't be allowed.
According to the city's rules. And yeah.
Janine, if you might mention how we view that with some of our grant agreements and why some of that changes the nature of how you might answer that question.
Yeah.
Or the overall question.
Yeah, so, you know, our grants, we have different types of funding and different conditions of things. When we're looking at access, we really are looking at who we're trying to serve and how things are designed. You can design facilities to limit certain things or to encourage certain things. There are many locations across the state where the change of use on a water body, the conflict is really within about 150, 200 feet of that access point. And so a lot of those things are controlled on this. In this case, the city has chosen to not appeal the judge's decision. It's our understanding that Lake Oswego Corps is appealing it. I believe the city is trying to meet the intent of what the judge has said by opening it up, removing the artwork. But I don't think they will try to do any improvements until the dust has settled and they can decide if they want to do some investment. It will be very interesting because they go around the right of way and some unique covenants associated with the property. But this was well over a decade of lawsuits and appeals to have public access at Millennium Park. The city's been very communicative with us, very receptive to the language Brian helped put together in consideration of 1974 rules on how to try to figure out some safety pieces. We did extend an offer that they're interested in a life jacket loaner station, that was something we could work with them. The city does manage one at George Rogers Park, so they're familiar with them. But right now it's very minimal use there.
Janine, we don't have any active grant agreements at Millennium Park, so
No.
we wouldn't have any sort of our own grant enforcement that Janine would be doing. And I would also say, member Lambert, Brian and I spent a horribly rainy, windy Friday out on the lake, so nobody could accuse us of having fun. We picked the worst day possible to be out. And it made a lot more sense when you saw it in person. I think a public access site, sure, for carrying some stuff down, and I understand what you're saying. Different people with carts and different things could, but it's just it's just not an access site the way we would think of it as an access site. It just wasn't designed around boating at all.
Yeah, understood. My only concern is, and maybe it's not a concern, if you guys squash that concern, that it just, you take that small model of controlling what can't go on the water at your property and then you expand that to a much larger model. Somebody figures that model out, all of a sudden it gets a little out of control. And it all started with that little site on Lake Oswego.
Yeah, no, those are things we will watch. We've had some discussion on them. There's also a very low clearance bridge that is also a limiting factor to get out onto the main body of water. But yes, this has been a discussion on whether it's circumventing authority for us to regulate things that are on there. This is the land manager's ability to control the activity and use on their property. And so we're watching.
Yeah, and also consider the fact that this is, it's in the middle of town. There's no infrastructure for trailer parking. It's, retail parking spaces. So if somebody even tried to carry an 18-foot on top of their vehicle, that's going to be cumbersome at best for parking, getting across the street, down to the water. So I think there's a lot of circumstances that mitigate your concerns, and that maybe for that location, it's reasonable. Or if you have, a deep white lake, there's no reason to place a restriction like that. So I think you would have more of a position to say, no, you're starting to regulate water activity, not just facility.
End of the day, if I know that Janine is watching public access. We're in a good spot.
Yeah.
I trust it.
And then, thinking about technology and some of the small electric motors that are being put into kayaks now, and the motorized foils and those sorts of things, you could easily launch a foil there. Paddle on it, lie on it, paddle on it, bridge and get it up. And
Yeah, I mean, right now it's kind of a wait and see. We don't know, is this going to be a real popular place to go, or is it a novelty thing, and that novelty will wear off as they look at and go like, okay, I can go in a little circle. There's only one place I can get out of on land. There's no sanitation out there. Is this just going to really minimize? There's a lot of unknown with this.
And once you're on the water, there's no access to the shore except at Millennium Park. So once you're on the water, if you need to use a restroom, if you want to have a picnic, there's no place to go other than back to the one facility. So I think this year there'll be a lot of novelty because people want to go see Lake Oswego. But I think the following year, the looky-loos have had their opportunity to look. I don't think it's necessarily going to be attractive place to the general.
anything else?
One last thing. So Lake Court is basically the homeowners association that surrounds the lake, the waterfront properties.
Yeah, the history of the property, it was a steel company, and the steel company set up Lake Oswego. They put the dam in, they did the whole urban development, and so it's kind of a planned community based on steel company vision. And so they created a corporation, but it's kind of the equivalent of the association.
But the body of water itself is public.
Yeah.
See, I think that's where Member Lambert is concerned. It's like, so the landowners could make their own regulations for a public body of water. I don't really like that.
Unfortunately, I think that's not an uncommon circumstance, because if we have, according to our rules, all surface water bodies are subject to OSMP regulation, including if the property or if the body of water is completely surrounded by private land, like you've got ranches in Eastern Oregon where 1,000 acres, there might be a couple water bodies in that facility, but we can't impose access. And so, and it's a public lake, but there's no public use because they can't have access.
I get all that. That's
And we're certainly learning about this. I think, so I could have this wrong, but when Brian and I were out there, as I understood it, the Lake Corps actually owns the bank, and then it's an easement back to the property owner. And that's how they can control what, so if I'm a homeowner and it looks like the bank is mine, it's actually the Lake Corps that owns it. So the Lake Corps says, hey, for you to use this easement, you have to agree to play by all these rules that we set. And so that is a bit unique to me, that the Lake Corps actually owns, as I understand it, and it may not be all, and I might not have that quite right, but they own and then ease back to the landowners, and that's how they can exhibit so much control on what happens on those banks.
And just for the record, my concern isn't necessarily with the private landowners. We all get private property rights. My concern is when public landowners start controlling that subject.
I'm glad you feel that way.
Any comments or questions?
For now.
Okay, so why don't we take a break? Let's be back here at 10:30.
Members of the public not familiar, there are some restrooms you can access just right around the corner as you came in.
All right, we are back and we're going to go into the mini jet boat update. Alan?
Okay, I'm gonna let Jennifer get the PowerPoint and I'll sit down and. Now that Christie showed me. Okay, last meeting. Chair Jackson, members of the board. Do I need to introduce myself again? I'm Alan Hanson, Senior Environmental Manager for the Oregon State Marine Corps. You had asked that we start looking at mini jets. And so this is just informational in nature. At this point, we're not asking to open rules or, anything at this point. This is just information. So I'm recycling an old presentation from Brian. So some of you will recognize the slides, but what I want to talk about is what is a mini jet? What are the potential concerns we see, and what are our current issues and what futures we have? And so for me, one of the challenging questions is what is a mini jet? So traditionally we worked under the concept that they're 8-foot, small boats, maybe 8 foot to 16 foot, typically aluminum hulls. They use PWC motors, so they're 200 to 300 horsepower. And again, this is just kind of a general description. They may be 100 horsepower, they may be 350 horsepower. Generally, they're designed so that they need little water, and that most of them have some sort of like HDPE coating on the bottom so that they can impact the bottom vegetation without significant damage to the boat. Of course, I messed it up. So one of the interesting things where we're at right now is we're seeing a big change in technology within boating. So the rush wave picture on the left side, jet powered boat, but it's an electric boat. And, we're seeing these with battery technology improving, that looks to be like a 6-foot boat. They're getting quite a reasonable amount of range and a pretty good amount of power. And so, it's not unreasonable that a little boat like that can do 30 miles an hour, be able to travel for maybe an hour. As we see battery technology improved, I think we're going to see more craft like that. But what we've talked about, that wouldn't be included in our discussion about mini jets. The middle slide is a gas-powered kayak, and it's a jet motor. I think they have about 10 horsepower motors, so that they're not super fast. But clearly, this gentleman is going over, it looks like maybe a beaver dam. And part of the concerns with the mini jets is some of the activity about running over habitat. And that's what this gentleman's doing. And then finally, that picture on the end, that's a gas-powered jet motor surfboard. And I don't know if a vessel like that can create the damage that we've heard complaints about, but it's one of those things. I don't like trying to define what a mini jet is, because I don't know what a mini jet is or what it's going to be. And a lot of times, if we want to say a mini jet is a 16-foot, under 16-foot boat, well, a lot of these boats are made in people's garages, with their own welders. They add a bowsprit, 2 feet out, and it's no longer 16 foot. And so I'm not sure how we would define it. I think that's one of our biggest challenges. These are recycled slides, and these are some of the potential conflicts. Now, before I talk about the slides, I want to talk about this gentleman. This series of slides was used in a prior presentation. The gentleman saw it, and he provided a response on YouTube. And out of respect for him, he is a great boater. I mean, he's courteous. You know, in all these pictures, he's coming off plane. He's acting appropriately. Good actor. This isn't a reflection on him or boaters, but what we see, these boaters are, the boats are small. They're able to access really skinny water that's traditionally been more restricted to paddlers. And so it's just an opportunity to have high-powered boaters next to paddlecraft. Here's some other pictures, and these are some of the, safety concerns we see. We've got this guy jumping vegetation, a couple pictures of that. Here you can see that this is super narrow water along with this one. On the road, we heard a lot about blind corners. I think in a lot of these waterways, I'm much more convinced that if you did have a paddler coming around some of these, brush that's hanging over the trees, it could create more of a dangerous situation because you have these little boats where, unlike the road, which is a pretty big, wide area, that the boater won't have the opportunity to react to the kayak or something if it pops out from under a tree or around a corner. So I think this is more of a potential. And down at the lower left, these are really skinny waterways these boats are able to get to, unlike, the road where we had the Road Jet Adventure boat that was a really large boat and couldn't even consider traveling in some of these. And environmentals, like I said, hard to show in a still image, but these boats are traveling across this grass bank. And, there's lots of pictures on the internet and YouTube where people are, going across gravel bars, going across trees. And so I think legitimately, to the extent that this represents habitat, they are impacting the habitat. And I say to the extent this, I don't know where this is. I mean, I think in some areas, this is just a muddy bank and probably not that big of an issue. In other areas, it could be habitat for, sensitive species. We just need to understand that. I added these slides. So first one, this is the same gentleman in the first slide that I talked about. He rescued a husband and wife, and he's got several videos where he's doing that. He's out picking up trash. So, mini jetters are not bad people. They're not bad boaters. This gentleman's courteous, responsible. So, I don't want to say that he can't, boat the Willamette or boat his chosen waterway if he's acting appropriately. This is just a quick assessment of this slide presentation. We were looking at defining a mini jet as a personal watercraft. And so under our current rules, PWCs can only go in lakes. The main part of the Columbia, there is some access down the John Day River, a little bit into the Deschutes. They can go in the Willamette River, basically north of Eugene. And then most coastal bays, and then up whatever river feeds that bay up to a defined point. And there's, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm not going into super detail about where they can and can't go, but this is generally what our rules say about PWCs. We have received a lot of complaints about the mini jets, and these are in the same waterways that are closed to PWCs, and so back in the, I think it was 2019 is when we attempted to create no. Do you know when the PWC rules?
2021.
2021 was the definition. I don't remember when we put the PWC rules in place.
Well, that was back in the late nineties.
Okay.
I was gonna say.
So I think what's happened is that, the people who used to mini jet, or excuse me, use their PWCs in the smaller waterways, that's being replaced by the mini jets in the smaller waterways. And so, you look at some of these rivers, these are pretty small rivers, and they're not in locations where the traditional users would necessarily anticipate seeing a high-powered boat coming up the waterway.
But some of those, haven't we had complaints about them going up like irrigation canals and stuff too? Is that the case? Yeah, so something as narrow as an irrigation canal.
Eastern Oregon.
Yeah, and realistically, these boats, they're only a couple feet wide. They can run in a couple of inches of water. So there's really not a lot of limits to where they can't go. And so that's one of the main conflicts with these boats, is that they're now able to access waterways that traditionally have not been boated, or that the boaters that are there, predominantly paddlers, are accustomed to seeing those boats.
You are aware that personal watercraft are defined by federal statute, and they do not include mini jet boats.
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning why the board made the decision. I'm just looking at how the vessels are used.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And those rivers, a lot of those rivers, I don't consider small river. The Santiam is pictures you showed before with gentlemen on the boat.
Yeah, no,
Rescuing paddlers and clearing logs and debris out of the river.
yeah. So, and just to be clear, I'm not recommending we do anything. I'm just, these are the areas where we've received complaints. How the board wants to respond to that is going to be up to the board. Some of the stakeholders we've heard from, so they're able to access habitat. They're, like with any boat, there's impacts to the environment, watershed impacts, water quality, irrigation, salmon spawning habitat, and again, submerged lands, because they're hitting, they're designed to bounce off rocks, trees, sandbars, gravel bars, etc. And of course, a lot of these waterways have cultural resources that the tribes are interested in protecting. This group, so in the last 2 months, we've seen several YouTube videos from this one boater, and it's a team of boaters. They're generally running around the Rogue. Got a picture of them cutting away logs so they can access the water bodies. A lot of times, the bottom left picture, that's a flooded waterway that typically wouldn't be boated, but because of the flood conditions are out there. And the one boater, his boat sunk, and so he's putting his boat into the water. This top picture, they're bouncing over these natural dams or obstacles. This super narrow waterway. The biggest concern for me is their social media. They're putting these videos out there. These two guys are extremely well prepared. Every video, they're wearing dry suits. They're wearing helmets. They have communication between the two boats. They're working together. They're pretty independent. So, they're boating what I would consider safely under the circumstances. I mean, this is not safe boating by any stretch. But you get a lot of commenters seeing this and they're saying, hey, this looks like a good time. And so they're looking at this saying, how can I do this? And my concern is, are they going to be wearing the dry suits and the helmets and having communication devices and having the experience to access these waterways and to be able to self-rescue? And so, if a lot of these, if there was just one boat, these guys would be in trouble.
Say that, Alan, the most concerning part for me out of those 4 pictures is just the cutting away of woody material and whatnot to access more areas, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that starts spreading amongst boaters. That's
Well,
concerning.
yeah, my position is that's improper use of the boat. Boat's not designed for you to be doing that. These thrill seekers are out doing it. There has to be a way to manage those without creating a situation where you ban these Oregon boaters from using their boat.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge. How do you manage?
Yeah. It's not this YouTuber, but there is one YouTuber, his screen name is Jetboat 4x4. And so that's kind of the mentality, is they're treating these like they're 4x4 trucks where they can go into, the wilderness. And that's exactly what these gentlemen are doing.
Isn't that similar to the people out with ORVs carrying up the road system and vegetation along the backcountry?
Yeah.
Is it the same type of challenge you have?
Yeah. Kind of along the same lines as your comment, Ruthie, is I've been thinking about this, trying to kind of form an opinion of what I would think appropriate, not that what I think is important. But I think we see this a lot. We don't see it on the waterway a lot, but we see it in parks and trails. You have trails that are hiker only. You have trails that you can have bicycles and horses. You have trails that you can have the motorized vessels. And I'm just considering that maybe we treat some of the waterways in a similar fashion. And maybe there are waterways where it might not be appropriate to have horsepower, large horsepower motors or motors in general, types of motors. I'm looking at less about what vessel they're using, or about the activity and the impact of that activity. So, because I don't want to single out mini jets. They look like fun. I mean, quite honestly, they look like a kick in the pants. But I also think there's a time and place where they may not be appropriate.
Should we have any restrictions on known tributaries that fish are spawning in?
So on the rules for the Rogue, I think that was the first example.
That one, but
Yeah.
like coastal streams with things like that.
We do have coastal streams that are close to boating.
Okay.
We really haven't gone through and said, let's look at the Oregon waterways and determine if a location's appropriate for boating. And traditionally, I think what we're seeing is historically, a jet boat was an 18-foot boat. It needed a foot of water. And so in some of these waterways, those are not accessible to a traditional jet boat. But as technology improves, and a lot of times, you don't see the larger jet boats designed to bounce off things. The owner still wants to avoid ripping off his loader unit or putting a hole in the hull. That's hard to say. Where these boats are really designed to be more of the off-road 4x4 vehicle.
But if they're not designed to bounce off rocks or to jump trees and stuff, they're really not designed that way. They've got a protective surface on the bottom like all boats do. So if they run into an obstruction, there's less damage to be occurred. But they're still not designed to bounce off rocks and trees and stuff.
Sure. Remember so when you watch a lot of the videos That is a very common activity where they're intentionally going across
I
sandbars,
agree with that.
jumping trees.
That doesn't mean a boat was designed to do that.
I'm not gonna argue that.
Is this the engineer coming out and you can?
That's irresponsible behavior.
Yeah. But I think, you know, the boats were designed to protect from that activity. And
Minimize the damage. I agree.
a lot of people are using it, engaging in that. I shouldn't say a lot of
These
people.
guys need to have a skateboard park built for them. They can go out and kill themselves.
You know, when I was young, there was a mini jet park, down in Albany. Yeah, down right on I-5, where was a little obstacle course and you'd see these little tiny boats.
So the challenge is, how do you stop this behavior? Yet protect the behavior of the first one you showed with the guy that's responsible
Yeah,
operating his boat. And that's true, not only for mini jet boats, but other boating activities.
absolutely. And, you know, again, my personal opinion is rather than looking at the vessel, look at the location and, you know, maybe consider that time of year, flow, tributary, you know, salmon bearing, and maybe we just say, you know, like we did on the Rogue, that the tributaries aren't appropriate for boats. Doesn't matter what type of boat, just they're not appropriate. And so, you know, in different sections, they can boat.
But even in making those rules, you're gonna still have these guys out pushing the limits. You're still gonna have to deal with them, probably through law enforcement and the rules you set up, because, you know, they're a danger to themselves and they're a danger to other people.
I think this gentleman was brought to our attention, or at least one of the early email chains that I saw. It was seen by a search and rescue or the sheriff.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
Alan, member with you, to be clear, this slide, and I think the next slide has some pictures from a YouTuber who's, in all fairness, was running the upper road, 2 years ago, who also went through Powerhouse, which is generally a class 4 rapid with one of their mini jets, but they were brought to our attention recently because they're running tributaries to the Rogue River, whether it be below Grants Pass or above Lost Creek Reservoir, right? And so the Forest Service brought this to our attention because they were concerned about the type of boating, the kind of the wood, that type of.
yeah, that, to Alan's, I'm in alignment with your just general perspective, which is kind of the approach that you all decided to take on the Rogue, is more of a surgical approach rather than blanket.
Well, I think it's appropriate to do the surgical approach.
They shouldn't be running one of the, in my personal opinion, they shouldn't be running one of these boats above Lost Creek Dam on the river. That's an inappropriate location. On the Columbia River, don't have at it. Maybe that's fun, but I do think it's something that we should look into in the future for sure.
What about like we do the boater safety course, can we like define what a mini jet is and make them have a license? So they have to go through some type of educational program where they learn rules of the road and things like that. Because I've seen the conflict I've seen with them is they're either unaware of the rules of the road or they do not care.
Yeah. I think the challenge with that, member message is going back to us defining what a jet is. And so the second we define something, you're going to have people hard at work designing outside our definition. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I think some of the bad actors are going to self-select out just by what they want to pull out their welder and add some stuff to their boat or take away
horsepower. I think like the over 200 horsepower is pretty significant on a small vessel.
Yeah, and some of these
have some parameters.
I've seen some of them where they're down at 6 feet, so you don't need a ton of horsepower to be able to do a lot of, high speed maneuvers. And
Do they need a voter card?
they do.
So they, in theory, have had some education.
Okay.
Yeah, as a motorized boat, they should be registered. They should have a boater's registration card. A lot of these are home built. There are kits available online, so, you know, I could order a kit, learn how to weld, but weld it together and, you know, go out on the waterway. So we don't know. I took away some of the pictures that Brian provided just to keep this, but so I say our first two concerns, we've got approximately 90 active registrations. That's based on, in our boat system, I did a search of open motor boats with aluminum hulls, propelled by a water jet, gas powered, and less than 17 feet. Now, that probably doesn't, I mean, I'm not going to say that 90 is accurate at all, because we know that they're home built. They're probably, you know, a lot of them aren't registered. We don't have criteria in our system to define a mini jet. And so this is just kind of a rough swag at what our registration looks like based on this criteria. And even the ones that showed up, I can't guarantee if we saw it, we would say it's a mini jet. But, you know, we are seeing numbers go up. And with some of the influencers, you know, saying.
Okay, before you move. Slide. Oh, where are you going back? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's my last slide.
Okay, I was going to mention, one of the challenges I think we've had as staff on the point of how many are there is just like any new technology, is the 90, let's say 90 to 200 of them out there in the state going to be all there ever is? Will this grow? I can tell you that right now you could go on Craigslist and buy what we'd probably say is most likely a mini jet. Some of them are out there for $75,000 right now. I don't know how many people are willing to shell out $75,000 to have this kind of fun. But I also think there's probably, you know, still people that are rat biking these, so to speak, where they're just welding up in their garage and finding an old torn up jet ski, pulling the motor out and doing that. So I wouldn't suggest that every one of these is $75,000, but it's not necessarily a cheap endeavor. They're still oftentimes buying jet skis to tear them apart to get the motors. And again, there's a couple on Craigslist right now for over $70,000.
I'm guessing you could get this one probably at pretty inexpensive.
So it's been a challenge for us to know in terms of how to inform the board. Does this problem grow, or where's this growth cycle?
Yeah.
Still in the curve, or are we past the curve?
What I guess a couple things for me is the longer technology stays around, obviously prices most likely are going to come down because you're seeing things get recycled, renovated, somebody gets a new one, et cetera. I think would behoove us to consider this when there potentially is 90 or a couple hundred Oregonians using. And I'm not saying to member with these things, but I'm not saying ban them, but at least have a conversation on where is appropriate, where is not appropriate type of behavior and whatnot before that problem gets huge and out of hand.
Yeah.
I think you have to look at other ways to deal with this too, that you haven't addressed. In Alaska, if there is this kind of behavior going on, it's noted by law enforcement, they have the authority to confiscate the plane or the boat or whatever using to do this. I think you have to pursue that kind of enforcement in order to stop this. That's the only way to stop. As far as technology, you're not going to stop technology.
No.
There's already a fully electric mini jet boat commercially available in New Zealand, and it's coming this way. People are going to take advantage of that technology and push it to the limit. Just humankind.
Yep.
So you have to find ways of dealing with this, but at the same time, not stop people from using these boats who use it responsibly, because there is value in that. You know, the responsible boater that we saw on the Santiam is top notch.
Yeah.
He's really trying to help the community and help the people, and this boat has utility in doing that, but you couldn't do that with another boat.
Right.
So how do you allow them to do that, but you stop this kind of behavior? I don't know.
And unfortunately, in our current society where we have influencers, it's almost like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
Where you get somebody who does something and somebody sees it and reports it and they get a citation or they get, a hand slap. And so they don't go here, they go over here. And they do the same irresponsible behavior. And it's just, and again, I agree with Craig, I don't want to see an outright ban on it. For a lot of reasons, because there are an awful lot of responsible people out there doing it, but the more that we have people like this that are doing the videos and kind of getting people, I mean, we see the same thing in paddle sports, where people do stuff. It's like, oh man, that looks like fun. I'm going to go down next adventure and buy me a whitewater kayak and run waterfalls.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah, no.
my concern again is this,
Yeah.
the 250,000 views, in the comments are all stereotyping, probably young men who see that and say, God, that looks like fun. I want to do it.
Mhm.
And, to Director Warner's point, yeah, there was a $75,000 mini jet at the boat show. They're probably not going to go up by that, but, kind of tongue in cheek, that one's going cheap. But if an enterprising individual can pick up a, busted up hull, make some repairs, find a jet ski, they can probably get into it for a couple thousand.
I think that the last thing I would say is that on the road, one of the things that we heard from quite a few folks, the public couldn't understand is, I can't have my jet ski here, but I can have one of these here. And essentially that's the public perception that I heard from a few folks is you're basically sitting on top of the motor instead of straddling. But what's the difference? So addressing that whole kind of quandary that I think the public finds themselves in, trying to determine what the difference is, why the restrictions are different, is something that would have to be considered as well.
But I think overall, what would be helpful, good discussion would be, as we've talked about, right? There's not an immediate rulemaking, obvious, let's do, but what would the board like to see staff do? Would you like us to continue to educate you? Would you like just like, as we entertain different rulemaking discussions, to keep an eye out for like we did with the rogue, right? We addressed some of that with the tributaries in the upper rogue for the first time. So do you want us to just start incorporating it into rule processes so we learn more about what rules do and don't work? What feels right for where we're at to the board?
So when we addressed this 4 years ago, whenever it was, we did wind up meeting with this community of voters, and they assured us they were going to try to make an effort to manage themselves. I don't know where that's at. I think we need to try that route as one approach to this, to get with the community and tell them this is unacceptable and we have to find ways to stop this. I think that's a start. Then I think we need to do on a case-by-case basis what we did on the road. Limit all boating in the streams that are sensitive and need to be protected. Not focus on one group of boaters, but just on limiting all boating activity that would cause that river to be degraded. So that's my recommendation. But
Member with you, Pat.
I don't think we could just let this slide. Forget about it. I think we have to address it as Member Lambert says. We have to figure out an approach that we can use consistently across the entire state.
Member with you, one of the things I did in looking at this issue, I reached out to ODF&W. So they have a classification system for rivers. And I believe it was like 1 through 10, where 10 was the Columbia, 1 was, a seasonal creek. But they already have some classification. So I was thinking maybe continue conversations with them to understand what they have in place for that, and maybe, and again, I don't know at this point, but maybe it'd be appropriate to say, okay, if it's classified as a 3 under their system, you know, maybe that's shouldn't be built or 2 or, you know, whatever, you know, the classification looks at. And, you know, that could be an avenue to, you know, leverage some of the existing information the state has to address this issue.
Wasn't there an organization formed when this came up before, it was called Blue Ribbon Camp or something? Who are representing these people?
Member with so in October 2021, I presented the board on the same subject. After that, we did meet with some groups, so we created Jet Responsibly. There's a video, it's an educational video out there that's available. We also worked with that group to create a rack card essentially that had some I consider non-governmental language on educating mini jetters. So that was, I would say, honestly successful for a couple of years. Now that group that was part of that initial efforts has either moved out of state or some of them are connected to this group. So that initial effort was good, but at this point, I think what you're seeing is a new group of mini jetters that aren't necessarily as informed.
Me, Alan, I think I always like it when Brian brings in the maps, the dots on it, right? Like here's the problem, very visual learner. So when we're looking at, like we did that on the road, where here's the incidents, here's what things have happened. Some of that type of information in a presentation with having conflicts, if they're reported, assuming they are, would be helpful for me. I think also what would be helpful is exactly what you were just saying, with some sort of, what are we talking about with classifications of streams? And, because while I said I don't want a blanket approach to dealing with issues like this, I do think that if we start to wade into this territory, and we already have actually with the road, banning the step of use on road tributaries in a certain section, to Chair Jackson's comment, it becomes whack-a-mole at that point, because they'll just move to the next set of tributaries up or the next river over. So you do have to have some sort of a statewide system of limiting or designing what's appropriate use of these classifications.
And I think I like the concept, and I think you had mentioned this, or maybe Brian had mentioned it 4 years ago, about the classification system, and then with help from ODF and W about what those classifications and impacts and how, you know, the criticality of these different classifications, to be able to come and say, you know, no jet powered motors on these kind, horsepower limits, because these are all obviously well over 10 horse, you know, and make some sort of, for those more sensitive stream classes, and just say, you know, these are the appropriate kinds of boats or no boats. But I mean, to me, it's a multi-year sort of data dig and conversation with, and also to some extent with some of the land managers about what they're seeing and how these kind of activities also affect what's going on.
Chair Jackson, in talking with Janine, you know, some of the landowners are looking at this saying they don't want these, you know, mini jets, and they're questioning whether they want to form a facility. So land managers definitely have concerns.
That's true.
So I would propose, based on what I'm hearing, that we schedule this back. Staff continues to work, gather the information the board's identifying, continue to educate, and we come back for another conversation in October with the board on this. But that we also, anytime we open up rulemaking going forward where there might be a nexus, we also take that opportunity to learn how to regulate and address these issues as well. Is that reasonable for the board? Again, somewhat like what we did with the road. We took it work for me. Yeah, it works for you. Yeah, right.
That also gives us a chance to get a boating season where we may get some law enforcement points. Because our system also, if somebody was out hiking on one of these and reported a boater, that would show up on our mapping too, right?
Chair Jackson, the reported boaters aren't necessarily mapped the GIS, but I can, what member Lambert described earlier with a map with points, I can put something in it.
Okay.
That's easily obtainable.
Anybody, any other comments? All right, we're on to our next item.
And Chair Jackson, we're having an issue where technology wise, the public can only see the slide. We can't get it to drop. So we're requesting a 5-minute break so we can restart the technology.
Okay, 5-minute tech break.
Make sure the public can see your faces.
Work.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. So on February 20th of this year, we received a rule petition to amend OAR 250 20-236 sub 6, which is boat operations in Lincoln County, to restrict the use of motors above Jack Morgan boat ramp. and the petition was submitted by the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. We accepted the form of the petition, substantially met all the OAR requirements. So we accepted that. So the petition's in front of you now. We've put it out for public comments. Let me back up the petition summary. So what they're requesting is that motors not be used above Jack Morgan Park on the basis of preventing bank erosion, decreased sedimentation / improved water quality, negative impacts to salmon habitat in all life stages, increased safety of non-motorized watercraft, unfair fishing advantage in commercial guides, and to ease fishing pressure and harm to the fish population. So the background on this, in 1987, the board imposed a jet restriction, but then in 2001, 2008, and 2013, the boards revisited this issue. And so, clearly we still have conflicts going on surrounding the issue of motorized boats in this particular area. We opened it up for public comments once we accepted the petition. And I believe Jennifer's provided you with all the comments, but what I will note is that we saw substantial comments combined, but then we also saw substantial comments for and against the petition. And so I think that emphasizes that there is currently a conflict, and based on the number of people commenting this morning, I think that emphasizes that we do have an active conflict. At this point, the board can vote to accept or deny the petition. If you accept the petition, that begins the rulemaking process. And what we would envision as staff is that we want to take some time, open up a rule advisory committee so that we can really understand the positions. I think there's some opportunity for the parties to work together and come to a solution independent of the rulemaking process. But I think opening the rulemaking process will provide, give the board an opportunity to provide some guidance in that process and make sure that we come up with a solution that hopefully lasts for more than 10 years. And we also, I think we would benefit from working with some of our other state agency partners, specifically ODF and W, because I think one of the main concerns is a habitat. And like we did on the road, we brought them in, and I think they would provide some useful information for us. So with that, staff recommends that we do open rulemaking at this time. And again, opening rulemaking doesn't bind you to issue rules. It just starts the process. Once we come back, there'll be an opportunity to propose rules, and then you'll have the final vote to decide whether we implement rules or not at a later date. But this just starts the process so that we can, officially investigate some of these issues and try and come up with a solution.
Any questions?
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, any questions? Go ahead, Member Withy.
Currently, what is the motor restriction?
So the motor restriction right now is no jet pumps above Jack Morgan Park. So what we see is there's the jack plates where I think it's predominantly guides, but it could be private parties as well. They have the ability to raise and lower their prop powered motor. Some of these boats have 200 horsepower motors. So, and the operator knows where the low water conditions are, so they can motor upstream, lift their jack plate, go through the shallow areas, drop them back down, and continue at speed. We also see a lot of drift boats with, the small motors.
Okay, but mostly the drift boats have 10 horsepower, 15 horsepower.
Yeah.
Are you're seeing a lot larger motors than that?
Typically for the drift boat it is a limited motor. I don't have a good feel for how many large motors are out there, but we are aware that there are several users a couple users at least, that have the larger motors and use a jack plate.
How far upstream is Jack Morgan Park?
I believe it's just above the tidal influence in the Silettes. I could be wrong with that.
20-ish miles, would that be accurate for the room?
Yeah, that'd be accurate.
Yeah.
Okay, 20-ish miles upstream. Okay,
So what's the fishing below Jack Morgan Park? Is it valuable fishing?
I don't know the fishing on the Silettes.
In more recent years, I think it's fair to say in the estuary, you can walk across boats. It's busy. There's a lot of fish captured out of it. A lot of miles, a lot of fish, a lot of boats.
Lowest 1 or 2 miles get very crowded for troll fisheries before it rains. But like nobody fishes that during the winter steelhead spring snow. The like winter steelhead fishing is 99.9% done above Morgan Park. Just for summer and winter steelhead.
Thank you.
So I really respect everybody's emotional attachment to the river. It's very clear. Everybody wants what's best for the river from what I've heard and what I've read. So everybody's after the same objective. One of my concerns about going into rulemaking is you put a proposed rule. So everybody is focused on that rule. I think we have to find new ways to solve the problem. This problem isn't isolated to this location. We have this throughout the state. We have more demand than we have supply, essentially. We have to find new ways to approach and solve these problems. And I'm a little concerned we're not looking at those new ways. We're just focused on banning this or banning that. I think we have to find different ways.
So member with the Rule Advisory Committee, that's a group, in looking at this, I've considered probably want a tribal representative, we'll want a representative from the Silettes Anglers Association, we'll want, community members, we'll want recreational fishermen, we'll want ODF and W. And that's an opportunity for all those parties. And if you have additional parties that you'd like us to consider, happy to do that as well. But that's an opportunity for this group to sit down together, have a conversation about what the goal is, how we can accomplish that goal, and then ideally that group will come up with a solution that is acceptable to all of them, and then we can present that to the board.
So, Ellen, to clarify, if we open rulemaking today, it doesn't have to be around a specific proposal.
No.
We can just say we're going to open rulemaking
Right.
to address issues from Jack Morgan Park.
The petition requested a remit or a draft rule.
Right.
That just opens the door for rulemaking. And so if we get 6 months down the road and, we decide a rule is not appropriate, we can vote. So if we can come up with some compromise, we can, propose a rule.
Normally when we open up rulemaking, issue a rule. That starts the discussion. We start having hearings to get the comments, but we issue an actual rule. You're saying we didn't have to do that in this case?
So we can accept the, we can accept the petition, open up the rulemaking process. Then we'll go forward, have the Rule Advisory Committee, have some public opportunities. Once we're comfortable that we have a proposed rule, then we'll provide a proposed rule to the board. And then you can vote to accept it, modify it, decline it. And then if you accept it, modify it, then
we're not going to have a proposed rule when we open rulemaking. If we accept the petition.
Right. We're just accepting the petition and starting the process.
So it's going to be similar to what we did in the Rogue.
The Rogue, we actually had a proposed rule that we opened rulemaking with, correct?
So I'll hop in for
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
So I think there's always a bit of difference in the process. So for instance, let's jump into the road one. We had a kitchen table process that ran for a year that really replaced the need for a rack, doing a rack after a year-long process to come in and learn the same things we learned over the years. So we jumped right to some rule language. If you remember back to some of, I'll have the contentious ones, the housekeeping ones that obviously aren't an issue. We've had different times. We have had racks. We've had groups that meet before. We've had times where really it is, but there's a solution. The staff says, yeah, we've done some community work outside of this, and this is where we think it's at. And so in this particular case, what seems to be the most advantageous, and it falls, I think, remember, in line with what the board's expressed in the past, is we open rulemaking, but we don't have our proposed rule language. We work with a rack and we go through the process and some community engagement, and we find out where people are. And the best case scenario for everybody, we emerge with language that everybody says yes. Will that happen here? Maybe, maybe not. And then if not, then we probably are back at either way, we're probably back at the board with some updates, but probably sometime in January at the board meeting would be when we'd be saying, okay, this is where we're at. The RAC came to an agreement or they didn't. Here's some different versions of rule language. Board, now what rule language would you like to go with for that next piece of process, or always this process to terminate? So, it probably does feel different, but I think some of that is because the situation's allowing for that. We've gotten a really good petition with really clear information up front. And we've got some people, as you pointed out, that care about the river. So it feels like it's worth talking about. And even if we jump right to some rulemaking now, we wouldn't have rulemaking done by this prime boating season. So it feels like we should take the time to learn and talk and engage.
If I remember correctly, it might have been before your time, but there was a rack convened for Newburgh Pool that was non-specific to a pool.
I was on a rack for the water access program years ago.
So you're the problem.
Ours didn't get adopted.
We both were.
So that process gave a lot of people the opportunity to be able to get input, draft rules, which was great. But my personal opinion on this is long history of conflict. It's several petitions. It hasn't been dealt with. I think it's our responsibility as a board to do the hard work of trying to revisit that situation and hopefully come up with something through Iraq that can hopefully put this issue to bed for some time for everybody. Doing nothing, in my opinion, is not enough.
I concur with that. One of my other concerns, though, this is not unique to this one particular river. This is similar to other rivers along the coastal range. What we do here could impact them. How do we incorporate them in what we're doing here so we're consistent across the line? I don't know how we do that, but that is concerning. This could apply to a number of rivers up and down the coast.
I'm not so sure I'm worried about consistency on that. I understand your point, but for the same reasons that we weren't worried of, sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, but the way I understood and the way I came across it, I'm not worried about consistency so much on the mini jet rules. I think it has to be dealt with individually. I think some of this on a case by case basis on the rivers almost has to be dealt with. My biggest concern is as we start having these conversations, is it goes back to the health of the ecosystem, water body, right? We just need to be hearing more from ODF and W on that kind of stuff, because that, could be applied to any water body in the state of Oregon. Once you kind of open that can of worms, it can be applied to any lake and any river. And ODF and W has to be coming in, weighing in and giving us their opinions and their recommendations on specific water bodies. So
there's a video put out by ODFW on this river system, 4 years ago. I sent it out to the board members, and it showed and compared this river to other rivers along the coast. And it still is a concern of mine. What you do here may impact them. Now, got to start somewhere. So I don't object to starting here, but we need to keep that in mind. And I do like the approach that we're now proposing everybody needs to be heard. You know, I am concerned about this river, according to ODFW, is the best river along the coast for drift fishing. And for disabled people to utilize and that type of fishing and get the most benefit out of it. So I would like to protect those interests as we go through this too. So that's my biggest concern.
Prior to discussing the Slits River petition, I should do this now.
Perfect.
I need to disclose a potential conflict of interest. I'm a licensed fishing guide in the state of Oregon. I don't offer guiding services on the Slits River, but my guide license allows me to do so. The board may have an opportunity to propose a vote on rules that could have a financial impact on my business, therefore giving rise to a potential conflict. Since we are not voting on the rules at this time, I will not know if I have an actual conflict until a later date. So there we have.
Any other discussion?
I want to make a motion here, but I don't know how to.
That's where I was at. Do we have, given the just general open rulemaking process, is there a suggested language?
I believe you could just make a motion to open on the Salem River upstream of Jackson Park.
You could direct us to do a rack and then come back to you with fine.
I would like to include a rack in the motion.
Yes, for sure.
So go ahead.
So I would make a motion to open for the board to open rulemaking on sleds above Jack Morgan Park.
Yes.
With the caveat that we form a rack to get board recommendations.
A second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
All right.
I was gonna say, Jennifer, why don't we do a roll call just to be straight?
Member Libby?
All right.
Member Lambert?
Aye.
Member Lumpet?
Aye.
Chair Jackson?
Aye.
So the only other thing I'd remind the board is now you have open rulemaking. And so while we'll be doing some staff parts, just remember that you should be careful about how you talk about issues that are open for rulemaking. And if you have any questions or members of the public are reaching out to you directly, certainly talk to Alan, Jennifer, and myself to help you navigate some of those, because we're now under, but even though we'll be going through a RAC process, we are under open rulemaking. And to that note, I would also add, one of the things the governor's really pushed us all as agencies to be more transparent. One of the recent changes in rulemaking processes that actually played out in this petition is, for the first time ever, we make our public comments available as we get them. We do that every few days. I think the language was as you get them, but there was no way to just do it in real time. So it's every few days. So one thing you might notice just in this era is people do have the ability to see each other's public comments. And so as we go through these processes, we're predicting that people will start to look at that and then reshape some of their public comments, and the volume of public comment would change based on that. So that was a change on this petition. It's all out there for the public, which is great, very transparent, just new to the process.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Our last item is meeting timelines. And I think we've gotten some guidance on additions to
For sure.
that list.
So Chair Jackson, in addition to the list, we will have a serial communication conversation and just general overview on work conduct in October. We'll be doing a check-in on mini jets in October. I would say we'll probably do a process update in June and October for the Salets. And so that would be the timelines on those. And then I would just remind the board that in June, we're in Roseburg, and our tentative plan for that is to have, the board meeting is on Thursday, Wednesday afternoon, probably sometime right around lunch. We'll arrange some tours down there, a few hours of tours, and then do a board dinner on that Wednesday night for those of you that can make that. I'm sure the Amaker will at least be a part of that tour, because that's a pretty neat facility and some of the design that we've done down there. And so with that, I just would remind you, this agenda item is to make sure we're talking about the things you want to talk about. So if you see something on our list you don't want to talk about, let us know. We'll scratch it. And if you want to add things, let us know.
Okay. With that, we are adjourned.
And adjourned 1 o'clock.